Previously, in the year 1510, a mysterious Western ship stranded on the shores of the Chosun kingdom. I, Sogipa, the local official of Chosun, investigating the ship. Inside, we found tragedy, dead and dying sailors, and a young girl imprisoned within a steel cell. Ignorant of her true nature, I was captivated by her beauty and foolishly freed her, only to discover she was a vampire. Her bite transformed me, and I awoke to a new horrifying reality. A nobleman now cursed with a vampiric thirst. Desperate and ashamed, my only solace was in the blood of animals, as I refused to harm humans. Resolved to end this curse, I embarked on a lone journey to find and confront the vampire girl, hoping to reclaim my lost humanity. I went to the shrine to say my final goodbyes to my ancestors. Then I said farewell to my family. I left my home to start searching for the blonde girl, the very girl who turned me into a vampire. At first, I thought it wouldn't take long. After all, this was Chosun, and she had blonde hair and pale skin. But I was mistaken. Vampires could change their appearance. I couldn't know their gender or body shape, but they could alter their eye color, hair color, and skin tone as they wished, so I couldn't find her. I had no choice but to look for places where murders or disappearances had occurred. Half of these cases were due to humans, the other half, tigers. There were too many tigers in the Korean peninsula. Not to mention, wolves and leopards were also abundant. But among these, there were certainly incidents caused by vampires. I hunted them down. I had sworn not to drink human blood, and the blood of animals was too repulsive, so I had no other choice. For decades, I killed thousands of vampires. Their numbers seemed to be increasing. It was clear she was responsible, but I never found her. Decades later, in the summer of 1592, Japan invaded Chosun with an army of 150,000 soldiers. The Japanese forces, with their immense military power, crushed Chosun. Many Chosun officials and soldiers fought bravely to the death, but Chosun, peaceful for 200 years, couldn't stop Japan, which had been warring for 100 years. The Japanese army of over 100,000 soldiers rapidly advanced hundreds of kilometers through Yeongdo, Busan, Sangju, and Cheongju. In the process, Chosun soldiers and civilians they encountered were brutally massacred. Millions of Chosun people fled from the Japanese army. I began to fight against the Japanese forces. I was strong as a human, but as a vampire I became many times stronger. With my superhuman strength, I defeated numerous Japanese soldiers, and drinking their blood, I became even stronger. I fought desperately as an official of Chosun. No, as a Chosun person. But there were too many Japanese soldiers. And among them were vampires. Vampire samurais wore bright red armor and were gigantic. They had drunk the blood of tens of thousands of Chosun people and become incredibly powerful. I barely survived several brushes with death fighting them. Among them was an especially large one. He was a monstrous giant with immense strength. I fought desperately and barely managed to win, but was completely exhausted. Fortunately, the Japanese forces could not continue the battle. The great naval commander, Admiral Yi Sun-sin, had blocked their sea supply lines. The Japanese army had to endure extreme hunger. The Chosun army and righteous armies began to counterattack. 7 years later, the Japanese army began to return to Japan. But Admiral Yi Sun-sin had no intention of letting them go. So, he attacked the Japanese ships in the waters of Noryang. I also boarded Admiral Yi Sun-sin's ship and fought hard. The fierce battle lasted all day. Towards the end of the battle, Admiral Yi Sun-sin was shot by a Japanese gun and fell. That was the end of the Imjin War. A few years later, I headed to Nagasaki, Japan. There, I boarded a ship to Spain. I had heard that the girl who turned me into a vampire had already left Chosun. But at that time, I didn't know that I would be entangled in wars as great as the Imjin War for hundreds of years.